So how do we weigh these two things against each other? Tax increases that theoretically should go to paying down the debt versus the depressing fact they'd have on jobs. Which one wins?
Well, so the other thing that we need to not forget, right, is the idea that by raising taxes we're going to actually collect a lot of revenue is that too is kind of should be taken with kind of lots of skepticism, especially if you're going to be increasing marginal rates. Because that we know for sure the government has tried to do this the last 50 years, the last 60 years, and no matter what the top marginal rates are on top earners, the government has never really managed to sustain tax collection as a share of GDP above 19%, and that's kind of during good years.
And so, particularly if the economy is slowing down and you have fewer people who are paying taxes.
So I mean, I think this idea to start with that we're going to be able to raise all this money, but that makes it worth it, you know, that we're going to be able to use all this money to pay down the debt.
Which is another assumption, by the way.
Is another exactly. I was going, and you were saying. I mean, I agree. It's like Rogoff and Reinhardt have said. It's like there's a moment where your debt becomes so big that it becomes a tumor that kills your economy. How much? On average, 1% a year of GDP, 1% of GDP doesn't sound like a lot, but if the country had reached this level in 1975, we would be 30% less wealthy.
I've been bemoaning what seems like the imminent decline of capitalism and maybe with it Western civilization for a few days, but and instead of just going in that direction for a second, I want to ask you specifically about the fiscal cliff, because Will mentioned the Tax Policy Center, and I think Greg Mankiw up at Harvard, who may have been very senior in Romney administration, that will never be, he was advancing this idea, and it's that if you cap deductions at $50,000 a year, then you're not necessarily raising rates. But it will, I think he says, what is it, 79% of that is going to be paid by the top 1%, and the top fifth of earners are going to pay like 90-some-odd% of that as well. That goes, kind of, you get a little bit of the class warfare going with that. Maybe Obama at least says, okay, at least we're sticking it to the high earners, and that way you don't raise rates. Is that the possibility? Is that the basis for what could be a compromise, or are we just hitting the accelerator and going off the cliff?
So what I like about this idea, right, it's the idea of you flatten the base. You don't allow that many deduction. You make it as simple when you file. Basically, the amount of taxes you pay is more a matter of how much you make rather than whether you own a house or you rent it, which states you live in, what you can deduct, whether you're married, whether you have children. I think this should not be factors that decide how much taxes you pay. The problem with, I think, the Mankiw idea, and I mean, I'll grant him that he's thought about this way more than I have, is if you don't just get rid of the deduction, and if you cap it, you make the tax code actually extremely complicated. Exactly. Because people are going to be actually thinking of, okay, so which deduction am I going to get now? We already spend so much time, you know, preparing our taxes. I actually think this gives even more power to the people.
I tried happy thoughts.
I talked to Senator Dick Durbin about that idea this morning to ask him about it because it sort of floated in the New York Times earlier. And the suggestion in the New York Times was that the Democrats are seriously considering it, which I found unlikely.
Good PR for the Democrats.
And I asked, and he said, absolutely we are. It's on the table. We'll take a look. Again, I don't think that's likely.
Can I mean, kind of, I'm sorry to even like depress you more.
Oh, no, go ahead. Don't stop. Go ahead.
Here's a message for everyone out there. This balanced approach, the Republicans have tried it before.
Yes.
All it means, we're going to get tax increases now and spending cuts.
This is with Reagan you're talking about, right?
Never. Reagan and Bush.
And Bush, too, yeah.
I mean, and why? It's because we get the taxes now, and usually we get a framework for how to cut spending, and then that never actually happens.
So I have to ask you, what do you think's going to happen? Because my own impression of this scenario is that we're talking all this time, we're spending all this time talking about the fiscal cliff. My feeling is that there's actually not going to be a deal reached, but there will be a deal in the immediate aftermath of going over that allows Republicans the ability to vote only for a tax cut as opposed to anything that would involve a tax increase.
I mean, it's a good question, but I'm not good at politics. I don't understand these guys. They make no sense, whether they're Republican or Democrats. What would
you advise them to do?
What I said was that just let the spending cuts go through.
Hit the accelerator. Go over the cliff.
With the spending cuts, absolutely.